Welcome to Mind Love, episode 23. Today's episode is all about social anxiety and being yourself.
40% of people consider themselves shy. Shy is just the everyday way of saying socially anxious. But if you ask people, have you ever been shy? Like, were you shy as a child? Were you shy as a teenager? The number goes up to 80%. And so almost everybody can relate to feeling self-conscious or feeling like they're going to be judged.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Hi, friends. First of all, I want to thank you all so much for your support. In 4 short months, so much has happened with this show, and I cannot believe how fast it's grown. This week, I have some big news. Mind Love is now a CastBox original. Yep, CastBox loved the show so much, they just had to get on board with the mission. CastBox is the fastest growing, highest rated podcast app on both iOS and Android, where you can find all of your favorite podcasts. You can create playlists and autoplay next episodes when you're binging your favorite shows. Personally, it's my fave and where I listen to all of my podcasts. You can listen to Mind Love wherever you access your podcasts, but I hope you'll give CastBox a try. Today, we're talking about social anxiety disorder, which is a much more common problem than we used to believe. Personally, I consider myself an extrovert and can still relate to some of these feelings and can definitely use some of these tips. Not only that, throughout the interview, I realized how universal some of these tips are in stepping out of your comfort zone, challenging yourself, and stepping into the real, authentic, unique, powerful you. Today, I found the absolute best person on the subject. Dr. Ellen Hendriksen is a clinical psychologist who helps millions calm their anxiety and be their authentic selves. She's the author of a best-selling book on Amazon called How to Be Yourself, Quiet Your Inner Critic and Rise Above Social Anxiety. And her approach is not only science-based and no judgment, but it's regularly featured in Psychology Today, Scientific American, HuffPost, and tons of others that I very much respect. 3 key things we will learn are the signs of social anxiety and how to know if you have it, how to identify your default safety behaviors that are holding you back, and small steps you can take right now to not only overcome your social anxiety, but to actually start thriving in social situations. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to sign up for the Morning Mind Love. You'll get short daily reminders of your own beauty, worth, and power so you can start each day with a positive mindset and keep your vibes up between episodes. To sign up, just visit mindlove.com and sign up right there on the homepage. You'll get some amazing free gifts when you do. First, you'll get our exclusive Powerless booklet, which is an awesome free booklet based on proven principles from the most successful people and from some of our favorite guests. You'll also get a free guided affirmation meditation set at the miracle tone of the solfeggio scale. If you don't know about it, this specific tone is said to help attract love, health, and abundance into your life. It basically tunes your frequency, and set with these affirmations, it really opens you up to personal transformation. Listeners have been absolutely loving the Morning Mind Love, by the way. Our listener of the week, Tia, said she does not know what she did before the Morning Mind Love. It's had such a positive effect on her day. So just head to mindlove.com and sign up on the homepage, or if you're out and about, text the word morning to 444-999. That's morning to 444-999, and we'll get you signed up from there. And now, let's welcome Dr. Ellen Hendriksen to the show.
I'm so excited to talk to you, Melissa. Thanks for having me on.
As a clinical psychologist, what initially piqued your interest about social anxiety?
So social anxiety is near and dear to my heart for many reasons. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I love working with people with social anxiety because they inevitably are just the nicest, most amazing people. And it's such a privilege to help them realize that. But I also like to joke that I'm not only the author of How to Be Yourself, I'm also a client. And this is the book that I wish I had when I was 20. Like, these are the things I wish I had known. I have a history of social anxiety myself. And so I wish I knew that, like, how I felt wasn't how I looked. I wish I knew that the things I was trying to do to make myself feel better, like avoid eye contact with people I wasn't comfortable with, or being super nice so people would like me. I wish I had known that those things were just keeping me anxious. I wish I'd known that my perfectionism, like thinking I had to come across as witty or smart, like all the time, was making me not say anything. So I've been on both sides. My wardrobe consisted of neutrals, and that's it for many years. Like, now my favorite color to wear is orange, so a lot has changed. But, I used to never raise my hand in class. And if I did have to talk, I would be sweating afterwards. I remember distinctly, like, shopping for shoes and looking and checking to make sure that the shoes would not click on the floor because I thought it would draw too much attention. I didn't want people to look at me. It's something that I've lived with and lived through and have grown from. And it's also something that I really love helping other people grow out of and to help them find the selves that they are without fear.
Do you have a first memory of social anxiety, or is it just something that's been dominant in your entire life?
Yeah, I do have a first memory. So my very first memory actually is one of social anxiety, for better or worse. And it's when I was in preschool. So I must have been about 3. And I remember waking up from an accidental nap. We were all there was 15 of us in this preschool, and we were all lying on mats on the floor. And I remember opening my eyes and feeling kind of dazed, like I wasn't sure what was happening. And my teacher was looking directly at me, smiling. She was very kind, very supportive, and just said, "Oh, there she is, like, hello, sweetheart." And I remember that all the other kids were also looking at me, mostly with curiosity. Nobody was pointing and laughing. There was nothing traumatic about this, but just waking up and having all the eyes on me was terrifying in some way. And I remember closing my eyes shut very tightly and just wishing that everybody would go away and wishing I could stop being the center of attention. So, like, that's my very first memory, for better or worse. I also remember being small enough for my mother to hold. And I remember that she was in conversation with another adult, and the adult said to me, like, "Oh, how are you?" And I just buried my face in her neck. And I remember her saying in a supportive way, definitely not in a critical way, like, "Can you say fine?" or "Can you say hi?" And so just the urge to hide was very prominent in my early life. And that's been a continuing theme that I've had to overcome as the decades have passed. And as I've gone through, clinical psychology training and learned the concrete ways to face this and face your fears and grow. And so it's been a real journey, and I'm really privileged to have taken it.
What's the root of social anxiety? Is it something that one experience can just traumatize us and contribute to, or is it something that we're predisposed to?
It's both. This is one of those questions where the answer is both and. And so it can absolutely be something that is very discrete. A lot of people develop social anxiety after being bullied. They learn that the world is not safe, that there is something wrong with them, that they are being targeted for some reason. And so that can spark social anxiety in a lot of folks. And there's a lot of overlap with trauma there. And so if somebody comes to me and has social anxiety as a result of being bullied or being cyberbullied, we go more into trauma work and those techniques. But it can also be, and is very commonly, something that just always is. And there, I like to say that we all have, like, kind of the clay or the Play-Doh of some kind of raw anxiety. We're all born with a certain genetic tendency to be more or less anxious. And for social anxiety in particular, if you have a first-degree relative, so a parent, a sibling, a child with social anxiety, you have a 4 to 6-fold increased risk of also having social anxiety. So there's something genetic about that. And I realize that there's a lot of overlap with environment. Again, your first degree relatives, you share an environment with them. And so there's this, what I call the coffee and cream swirl. Once you put them together, they're impossible to separate, of genetics and experience. Sometimes our genetics, that raw Play-Doh, gets shaped into a particular kind of anxiety based on the experiences we have. So for some people, that might end up being shaped into social anxiety. It could end up being shaped into a certain kind of phobia. It could be shaped into something more like OCD or panic or something like that. It just depends on what we go through in our lives.
I feel like some people might be uncomfortable in social situations and not have a name for it. How do you know, or what are the signs of social anxiety?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yeah, no, because I've gotten so much feedback on the book from folks saying, like, I never had a name for this. This was just something I thought was wrong with me. It's just I knew I was awkward or shy or introverted or something. I didn't know what it was. And now I have a name. And I think it's very empowering for people to discover that phrase, social anxiety, and to have it attached to themselves, because that implies that there's something they can do. That when it's so common that it has a name, you feel so much less alone, and it can be comforting to know that there are tools that you can use. So the fundamental sign of social anxiety is this sense of self-consciousness. Okay, we can all relate to a experience of feeling self-conscious for something on the outside. So we've all had the experience where we look in the mirror and we're having just a horrible hair day, or we have this big zit, or we think we look terrible in these pants. And so there follows this urge to conceal. So either we put on a hat, or we throw on some tinted moisturizer, or we change our pants. But if we have to go out like that, we feel self-conscious. We have this urge to hide. We might, turn our face so people can't see, the big zit, or we might go the long way around so people don't look at us. And so that sense of self-consciousness is the same sense that we have when we are socially anxious, except instead of for being self-conscious about something on the outside, we're self-conscious about something on the inside. So there are 4 general buckets of social anxiety. And so one is the outside. So how we look, we might think we're too fat. We might think we're ugly. We might think that we look weird. So that's one. The second bucket of social anxiety is the signs of anxiety themselves. So we might think that we blush too easily, or that we're going to sweat through our clothes, or our hands are going to shake, or our voice is going to tremble. And then the third and fourth buckets are the biggest ones. And those are, one, our social skills. We might think that we're incompetent, or that we're boring, or that we're awkward, or we're not funny or cool enough for people to like or hang out with. And then the fourth is just our whole personality, that we're stupid, or we're incompetent, or we're not enough in some way, and that people are going to reject us. And so there follows this urge to hide. And we can do that in one of 2 ways. We can either hide overtly, so meaning we just don't show up. So we don't show up to the party, we don't respond to the texts, we don't raise our hand in class, we eat lunch at our desk rather than with our colleagues because we feel awkward. But we might also avoid covertly. So we might go to the party, but only talk to the friend we came with. Or we might scroll through our phone, or stand on the edge of groups, or spend our time like petting the host's cat. So the root of social anxiety is this fear that a fatal flaw will be revealed to everyone, and as a result will be judged or rejected for it. But it's also fed and watered by avoidance, whether overt or covert.
So a lot of these things are probably occurring because of our own beliefs about ourselves. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yes.
What are ways that this inner critic shows up, and what can we do to quiet that voice?
Sure. So the inner critic shows up in a lot of ways. I think all of us can relate to this. And the inner critic can have it varies. Like I've had some people tell me like, oh, my inner critic is a real jerk. It criticizes me all the time. It says, what you're doing is stupid. You're not good enough. Personally, my inner critic is more like an old lady who clutches her pearls. She's like, that's not appropriate. You can't do that. What will people think? And so it really can vary. The inner critic can have very different voices, but whatever the inner critic does, it's telling you that you're not sufficient, that you're not enough, that there is some kind of fatal flaw that unless you work hard to hide it or conceal it will become obvious, and that you'll get embarrassed or humiliated or rejected because of that. So the inner critic is driven by a lot of things, but a big one is perfectionism. And perfectionism is a little bit of a misnomer because, I think none of us are really trying to actually be perfect, but perfectionism is more about never being good enough. And that ties right into what the inner critic is telling us. We put so much pressure on ourselves to be smart or funny or interesting or cool that trips us up. And it's all or nothing. We think that unless we give some kind of stellar performance, we're a failure. And so the answer is to lower the bar, to learn that it's okay, not to be perfectly smooth and articulate. It's okay to have an awkward silence or two. It's okay to, not be funny and entertaining 100% of the time. And when we see that nothing tragic happens, that our worst case scenarios that the inner critic, tells us is around the corner, when they don't actually materialize, and when we see that we can handle kind of the foibles and the bumps of life, those experiences, getting evidence under our belt, can help quiet the inner critic, because then we know, usually nothing bad happens, or see, I could do this. And that's really key to helping to quiet that inner critic.
It's interesting because I never considered myself somebody with social anxiety. I am an extrovert. I get energy from speaking in front of people. I will be the first to raise my hand. I want to go up and give an example. But when I'm in large groups, like a networking event or something like that, I often will go to the corner and play on my phone. Something about the one-to-one interactions make me more nervous than talking to an entire group. Is that a form of social anxiety?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I think everybody can relate to socially anxious moments. It takes totally different forms. As you were saying that, you're the first to raise your hand. You want to go up on stage and, do the example, like, oh, that's just the opposite of how I am. But yeah, absolutely. They're all a form of social anxiety. And it's totally common for extroverts to be socially anxious in different situations, or sometimes even all the time, and that's a particularly tough place to be in, because then extroverts, like you said, get their energy from being with people, but then if extroverts are also afraid that those people are judging them, they're kind of between this rock and a hard place. Like I was somebody I always mention in interviews is I was talking to this gentleman who is a stand-up comic and a teacher. Like he loves being in front of people, but he is just continually afraid that they are judging him. So it's really hard. He has to keep pushing himself and gathering that evidence that nothing bad happens and that he can handle, being in front of these people. And slowly, he's chipping away and learning that he's okay just as he is. But it's also super common to be a socially anxious introvert. And I think sometimes those get conflated, because while introverts, they recharge, they get their energy by being alone or one-on-one or in small groups of people they know well. Sometimes that can get mistaken for social anxiety, like if they avoid big groups or big parties. But the difference is, I got a lot of people who ask me, how do I know if I'm socially anxious or if I'm just an introvert? The difference is fear. So if you choose not to go to the party because it's not your scene, it's not your style, you get drained, that's one thing. But if you kind of want to go, or it's important to you, or it's important to someone else that you show up, but you just can't because you're afraid, then that speaks more to social anxiety. So introversion and extroversion is more about energy, whereas social anxiety is really about fear, and fear specifically about that reveal that something is wrong.
I feel like some people just think they have terrible social skills. Is that true in a lot of cases?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Yes. Okay. So no. So there are actually no social skills problems in social anxiety. And so I know that doesn't feel like it's true, because I know, like, when I have a socially anxious moment, even now, I still have my moments. Like, I use all the techniques in the book and I've come a long way, but it's not that I never get anxious. It's that, it doesn't own me as much. But when I feel anxious, like in a group of people or in a group of strangers or around authority figures, I feel like I've lost all my social skills. I feel like I've kind of lost the ability to talk, or I'm not sure, it's hard to think through that buzz of adrenaline. But what's happening is that when we feel anxious, when we feel self-conscious, our attention turns inward, and we often start to monitor ourselves. Like, how is this going? But the inner critic then takes over and says, this is going terribly. Like, you're screwing this up. What you said just sounded terrible. Why did you say that? And so there's this kind of inner dialogue and an inner focus that's happening. And the way to remedy that is to turn our attention from the inside to the outside. So to turn our attention inside out. And there, if we can focus on pretty much anything except ourselves, so focus on the person we're talking to, like listen really closely to what they're saying, to focus on the group around us, then our bandwidth gets freed up. It's not taken up by trying to plan what to say next, or trying to monitor what we just said to see if it sounded stupid, or to wonder like, oh, well, should I stand this way or should I stand this way to look more casual? We're focused outward, and then the bandwidth gets freed up, and we can naturally fill that in with our own curiosity or interest or just our authenticity. So that's a tool I use again and again.
That's a great tool, because I feel like it's relevant in more situations than just social anxiety. What struck a chord with me was even in trying to accomplish my goals. So when I was launching this podcast, a few limiting beliefs came up that I realized were holding me back. And the way that I overcame that was, instead of letting that internal dialogue overtake me and actually stop me, was to ignore it completely and just take next actions. So even if they were super small, I was able to just take one little step at least, like even if I couldn't handle the big ones. And that started building momentum that reminded me of that comedian you were talking about, where then suddenly you've got this momentum, whether energetically or just with your own confidence level, to take a bigger action next time.
That's awesome. So you've discovered like the number one secret, basically, and that is to do little things kind of before you're ready. So your inner critic is telling you like, you can't do this or don't try that. And so what to do instead is to put the action first, to put behavior first, and then confidence will catch up. Like, people often come to me and they say, I wish I could kind of retreat from the world and like work on myself and read some books and just gain confidence. And then I could step back into my life and really live the life I want to live. And I say, that's awesome. That I think I commend you wanting to move forward, and let's do that in the opposite order. Let's have you do the stuff that you've been wanting to do. Let's have you live your life, and your confidence will catch up from there. So we have to build that evidence kind of before we're 100% ready to push a little bit, like not push ourselves into like being terrified or doing something that we're like really not ready for, but push ourselves a little, stretch. And again, as we gather that evidence, our confidence grows in return.
I can see how these things can be highly effective for a physical, in-person social situation, because there are actions that you can take. But how does social media affect those with social anxiety? You're by yourself on the other side of the screen. Do you have a greater chance of getting into those internal dialogues?
Sure. I'm glad you asked that too. So social media is a double-edged sword. So social media can be a really nice way for people who are socially anxious to interact. Like there is, I think the medium of typing, of like posting a comment or like having to write something out, slows us down. And so there's this time to edit and to think and to perfect. And so that if that's an entry into being social that somebody wouldn't have otherwise, then great. That's a wonderful way to connect with people. At the same time, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. And so I think if we're spending a lot of our time on social media either to avoid people or in order to have that time to perfect and edit, then that does take away from the practice we get in speaking face to face. And the less experience we have, the less evidence we have that we can handle it and we can do it. I'm definitely not anti-tech. I use my phone just as much as anyone else. I love seeing friends' pictures and updates on social media. And at the same time, I think there's that saying that the mind makes a wonderful servant but a terrible master. I think the same thing goes for social media, that we should use it as a tool, as just what it is. But it's so easy to let it take over our lives. And I think we need to make sure that we make room for people and for face-to-face conversations. There was actually a study. It's a few years old, but I think it still relates, where they tracked people who are using Facebook and found that the people who just get on and kind of lurk, like look at their friends' pictures and but don't comment, don't like anything, are much less well off in terms of, I forget what the exact outcomes were, but definitely are less happy than the people who on Facebook will interact and will post comments and like stuff and will generally interact. And that is a much more active role and kind of a better way to be on social media. So if you're going to be on, do it all the way and participate. And that's a good way to both put yourself out there and reap the benefits of social media.
That also sounds like it could be an easier gateway for some people to start interacting through comments rather than in person.
Absolutely. And so again, it's this double-edged sword. So yes, it can be this wonderful gateway that helps folks, especially younger adults or, adolescents, like really kind of come out of their shells and allows them to experiment with like, who am I? And what's my emerging identity? And at the same time, it's especially technology lets us stay immersed in this world of our own choosing. And then there's less time spent navigating an uncertain world. And uncertainty is what drives anxiety. And so if we're not used to dealing with uncertainty, if we're used to knowing exactly where we're going because of Google Maps, if we look at the menu at every restaurant we go to beforehand, if we read all the reviews for a destination we're going to and there's nothing left to chance, then we don't really get that practice dealing with uncertainty. And then again, there's less evidence to know that we can handle uncertainty when it comes to the big things, like a career, like what am I going to do for my life's work, or for romance, like is this the am I certain that this is the right person to be with, or is there somebody a better match for me a swipe away. So I think that like it's a wonderful gateway, and that we need to make sure that we have practice dealing with uncertainty and just the the things that life throws at us. So we can know that we can cope with the big things when they come along.
For these little baby steps, is it more helpful for people to try going to some sort of networking event where there's more people, or is it better to start out with, say, a coffee date with a new friend?
Well, I think it depends on what is a little bit uncomfortable for each person. And so if, for example, if making one-on-one conversation is a step outside of their comfort zone, then perhaps that could be a place to start. If being the center of attention is a place that pushes them out of their comfort zone, maybe they could raise their hand in a group or otherwise draw attention to themselves. If it's so customizable, and it really depends on what the fear is. If there's a fear of making mistakes, you can actually orchestrate that and make a little mistake on purpose. You could, put a typo in your email before you send it. You could, I've done this with clients because what we do is try to deliberately engage in the things that they're afraid of, to do the things that are a little bit embarrassing. And so we've gone to I do these things along with my clients. And so I've gone to a hardware store and asked for lemongrass, or I've spilled my coffee like deliberately in a Starbucks, and certainly been appropriate about it, like tried to help clean it up and let them know immediately. There was one client I had who was very self-conscious about exercising, so we went jogging together. And so it really depends on what your particular fears are. And so I encourage people to think about this and make it quite deliberate, and to write down what I call a challenge list. And so to write maybe 3 or 4 things that are a little bit challenging. Like if we're on a 1 to 100 scale, like 0 to 1 to 30. And then put a few items that are a little harder, 30 to 70, and some that are really out of reach, like the 70 to 100s. And then as you start to work your way through, what happens is really interesting. You never actually have to experience a fear that's really high, those 70s to 100s, because as you work your way through the smaller things, you gain confidence and you figure out, hey, I can do this, and you get motivated and you get psyched to do more. And so by the time you get to the things that are really big reaches, they don't feel so out of reach anymore. They become much more moderate. And that's very empowering. Something I also tell clients is that as they work through, it's not going to be this epiphany moment like, oh my gosh, I did it, that's amazing. What happens is as they gain strength and confidence and they grow, they have a moment where they realize, hey, I never would have done that before. Like you can only see your progress in retrospect as you look back. And so they might think, hey, I never would have gone to a party without thinking of a million reasons to stay home. Or, oh, I never would have complimented a stranger on her shoes before. Or, hey, I never would have flagged down the waiter and said, I'm ready for the check. I would have just waited until he noticed me. And so that moment may not happen right away, but when it happens, it's very, very satisfying and can help you see how far you've come.
I love that. I have this email list that sends people uplifting words to start the day, and I get them myself. And it's funny because I'll be reading one and think to myself, oh yeah, I wrote this. But the one I got this morning was, take a look at yourself 1 year ago. Look how far you've come. And I thought, oh my God, first of all, this feels like my highest self speaking to me. So I love my own email list. But second of all, I track my progress in my favorite tool, the self journal. And I can look back and think, wow, I really have accomplished so much. So I think it could be really helpful for people to track their small wins like I do.
Yes.
So that they can look back and see how far they've really come, because it's so powerful to feel that so concretely.
Absolutely. Yeah. We only realize how far we've come when we do look back. And I see that happen over and over again. It's so fantastic. People will say to me like, oh, well, I put on I'm on my way over here. I put on my headphones and like kind of bopped around to the music while I was on the subway. I never would have done that before. Or, I went and I browsed in a small store where the owner could see me, and I actually made small talk with him, and then I left without buying anything. Like I didn't feel obligated. And so like these little wins that we might not think about, but at first, but then we look back and we're like, hey, that's new, that's different, are really, really rewarding.
I think too, how we talked about earlier, where it can be very empowering for people to realize there's a name for whatever they're struggling with. But also sometimes I think that having that name can be a crutch. For example, I know I have a friend that has anxiety and a little bit of depression, and she uses it as an excuse to not have to break free from that.
Okay.
But one thing that I find empowering is that while you're talking about doing these little things that scare you, just because you have social anxiety doesn't mean you're alone in having to do that to overcome whatever it is. For example, I try to do something every day that scares me. And one recent thing was I'm in the middle of negotiations with something, and I went back and forth a few times. Number one, I'm impatient, and so I want to just like have the whole dialogue immediately, but I know patience helps with negotiation. And number two, I'm afraid that they're going to reject it and I'm going to lose the whole offer. And so I think knowing that other people are doing these little things that scare them in other ways, because we all have our own issues, can be really empowering too.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, as Kristen Neff, who is a researcher at the University of Texas and a real guru about self-compassion, calls this our common humanity. And basically anything that we're going through, any emotion that we have, we can be guaranteed that we're not the only one, that everybody goes through fear and doubt and self-consciousness and self-criticism, that this is just part of the human condition. And I think that the scientist in me also thinks that we're just evolved to have self-doubt. We're evolved to feel insecure because that forces introspection. It makes us look at ourselves and think about how we can grow and improve and ultimately get along with our fellow humans. And that in turn helps us on a very Darwinistic level, like ultimately reproduce and carry on. And so getting along as a group, we're social animals, is so important. And so I think a little bit of self-doubt and a little bit of self-criticism actually sparks us to make sure that happens, to make sure that we check ourselves and get along. Just quickly, I want to say, I'm glad you mentioned your friend in terms of like using anxiety and depression as an excuse. A lot of people will ask me, like, how can I help a friend with social anxiety? How can I help somebody who is kind of like my friend in a bubble? Like they seem to need kind of special treatment or have to be treated very delicately. And so I in the book, I say that a good therapist is like a good bra, that they both push and support you at the same time. And so a friend is not the same as a therapist, but I think some of the same principles can apply. So their anxiety is real. So it's certainly important to support them and respect their very real fears. But at the same time, you can encourage them to stretch and grow and to try things that are just outside their comfort zone. And so I think a way to do that is to talk about the difference between support and reassurance. So reassurance is not helpful. And so that's saying like things will be fine, nothing bad will happen. Like there's nothing to worry about. And these are actually false promises because ultimately, you can't control what happens to them. So if you want to be supportive, you can tell the truth and emphasize how capable they are. You can say things like the first few minutes are the hardest, or last time you stuck with this, you were glad you did it, or you're strong and you can get through this. Or, specifically for social anxiety, you can help counter their inner critic by giving them some heartfelt affirmation, like, I'm so happy you decided to come, or I really appreciate your company. So telling the truth and emphasizing their capability and just how happy you are to be in their company can be ways to support somebody who is anxious and maybe has a habit of like canceling at the last minute or like not returning texts or emails about invitations. But you certainly don't have to treat that person, like with kid gloves, but you can support them as well.
Okay, so say someone takes that first step and they challenge themselves to go out into a social situation. I think really caring what people think can still be crippling at times, and you can go home and maybe still not feel good about the encounter, wondering if you said the right things or they're judging you. What are some tips to stop caring so much about what other people think?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. So it's really important to say that when we do push ourselves, it's gonna feel wrong at first. And part of social anxiety is that it's not just anxiety in the moment, is that there's this anticipatory anxiety that leads up to a situation. Like there's the dread of like, oh my gosh, I have to go to this party, or I have to go to this wedding reception, or, I'm going to have to give this speech that we can all relate to. Well, hopefully most of us can relate to the dread that comes before something, that we don't feel quite ready for. But there's also this aftermath. There's what in technical terms is called post-event processing, but it's essentially just kicking ourselves. It's playing the low light reel over and over again and saying to ourselves like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? Or what was I thinking? And kicking ourselves after after we push ourselves. So just to let folks know that, that's absolutely possible. But I think something that we can do in the moment, at least, there's two things that can help reduce that kicking ourselves. One is to give yourself a mission to fulfill. So like give yourself a role to play. So for instance, if you're a member of an organization, like a well-kept secret is to take on a leadership role. And so like that can give you a reason to talk to everyone, like can give you a duty to fulfill, or a certain mission or a role to play can also be done informally. Like if you're going to a party, you could assign yourself the task of talking to 3 new people. Or if you're in a networking event, you can give yourself the goal of exchanging, 3 sets of business cards or 3 numbers or emails. And so this gives you a purpose, and it takes away that biggest driver of anxiety, which is uncertainty. There was this lovely study that I like to talk about all the time by 2 Australian researchers, Doctors Simon Thompson and Ron Rapay. And what they did is they took women who had social anxiety and also women who are kind of more confidently chatty and extroverted than average, like women who strike up conversations in the line at the grocery store. And one at a time, they had them participate in an experiment that, unbeknownst to them, started as soon as they walked into the lab waiting room. And so they walked in, sat down, and a research assistant came in posing as another participant. And he said, "Oh, I hope we don't have to wait too long." And then he just rolled with whatever conversation ensued, whether that was chatting or nothing. And then every 30 seconds for 5 minutes, if conversation had lulled, he would prompt them again by, just inserting a little, just a comment or just, something to get conversation going. And this went on again for 5 minutes. Okay, so after those 5 minutes of really unstructured conversation, the researchers came in and said, "Okay, thank you so much for coming, you guys. Really appreciate you participating. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Pretend that you're at a party and you have to get to know each other as well as you can in the next 5 minutes." Okay, so now everybody has some structure. They have a role to play. They know what they're supposed to do. And then conversation ensues again. And then at the end of these 5 minutes, the experiment's over and everything is explained. But then after the fact, raters looked at the videos of both sets of interactions. So the unstructured 5 minutes and the structured 5 minutes where these women had a role to play, had a mission to fulfill. And they rated them on social competence. And in the first 5 minutes, as you may guess, the women with social anxiety did quite a bit worse than the women who were kind of more, confidently chatty than average. But in the second 5 minutes, when there's a structure, the two groups are almost neck and neck. And that I think is really impressive because, again, these are women with social anxiety can rise to this level that's almost equal to women who just chat, without a thought and that are like quite extroverted and not anxious at all. And that's really striking. That is, if you have a mission and you have some structure, the anxiety really falls away. And so that's a way to feel more comfortable in the moment and to kick ourselves less afterwards.
Again, this is a great tip that can help you beyond social anxiety. One of the most powerful things that I have done in launching this podcast and really going towards my goals has been to create a structure for my day. I do this by laying out my top 3 goals for the next day the night before. That way, when I wake up, I know exactly what needs to be done and I can get right to doing it. This not only removes the emotion, but it builds momentum by propelling you to take action instead of overthinking every little step. Today, try to challenge yourself to take note of any of those moments that you don't necessarily know what to do next. Now, try to figure out if there's a way you can add a little bit more structure to remove these moments of limbo as much as possible.
One other thing to do is to experiment with dropping the very things that you're doing to save yourself. And so let me explain what I mean by that. So a lot of times when we're in a socially anxious moment, we'll do these little things to compensate. Like maybe we won't make eye contact, or maybe I've seen like women who put their hand in front of their mouth when they're talking, or they'll talk at the floor and therefore speak quite softly, or they'll talk really fast and try to get it over with. Or they'll pepper the person that they're talking to with questions so that they don't have to talk or reveal things about themselves. And so if there's any little strategies that we're using, either consciously or unconsciously, what we can do is we can experiment with releasing those and doing the opposite. So if we are avoiding eye contact, we can deliberately try to drop that and to make eye contact. If we're talking at the floor, we can square our shoulders and look straight at the person we're chatting with. So these little behaviors, these little safety behaviors, are the things we're doing to try to keep ourselves safe. But really, when nothing bad happens or the conversation goes okay, we kind of hold on by our fingertips, then those safety behaviors get the credit. So we need to drop those. And what happens, there's some lovely studies by this duo of researchers from the University of British Columbia, Lynn Alden and Charlie Taylor, and they found that when folks with social anxiety drop those little behaviors, and so drop what I call the life preserver that's actually holding you underwater, that the people we're talking to, our conversation partners, rate us as more likable. They would like to be friends with us more, and they also rate us as more authentic. And those are all things that, certainly we would like to have come across. But not only that, the folks who drop those safety behaviors feel better. We feel less anxious when we stop trying to save ourselves. And that also can lead not only to a better experience in the moment, but to kicking ourselves less after the fact.
Again, a great tip for both social anxiety and beyond. The first step being awareness. What are you doing that might be holding you back from not only connecting with other people, but also achieving what you're meant to achieve in this life? Identify those and figure out a way that you can move beyond them. The first step, regardless of what you're using this tip for, is awareness. The reason being is you can't fix something that you don't know is a problem. Try to observe yourself today and see what might be holding you back. Are there thoughts going through your head? Do you have a default behavior? Are you checking social media when you should be taking the next action? Identify it, write it down, and then use these as a trigger for a new, more productive behavior.
In the study, I can't remember the exact number, but it was high 80s, low 90s percentage of people can identify at least one thing that they're doing that they're doing to try to save themselves. And that once it's identified, it might take some practice to drop it, but identifying that is the first part. We all have those little unconscious things that we're doing as well, but those emerge over time. And I think we gather momentum as we start dropping the little things that we think that we're doing to save ourselves. And so it's a process, absolutely, but it can absolutely be done.
Okay, so say somebody starts to challenge their social anxiety and they're going out and making these connections. What tips do you have to help them move beyond small talk and start to develop a friendship there?
Sure. So I think that's a great question, because oftentimes people with social anxiety will come to my office and say, this is really embarrassing, but like, how do I make friends? And that when I Google that, or like when I think about that, what comes back is just places to meet people. And that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, what do I say? How do I do this? And so there, the answer is threefold. So one is to go, one is repetition. So we need to see the same people over and over again. And it takes, on average, about 6 to 8 conversations, like not just hi, but a conversation before somebody considers us a friend. And so that implies that we have to show up at the same place and talk to the same people, 6 to 8 or more times. And so to try to focus on a recurring group where you see the same people. And so that could be the same yoga class every week. It could be taking a class that's interactive. It could be just another kind of organization. It could be an informal group. It could be getting together with a bunch of people for This Is Us night, And so just it should be the same faces, though, because that repetition is really important. And this seems obvious, but it's not intuitive for folks who are socially anxious, is that we have to tell others about ourselves. We have to disclose and reveal a little bit about what we think and do and feel. But it's important it can be reassuring to know that that doesn't mean that we have to confess our deepest, darkest secrets and we don't have to tell our life story. Even talking about the weather can be a disclosure. You could say, I'm so glad it's sunny out today because I was able to ride my bike here. Or like, I'm actually glad it's raining because I find the gray really soothing. And so just a little something about ourselves is really important. A lot of people with social anxiety will keep their thoughts and their feelings really close to the vest and will only ask questions of others or will stay really quiet. So to reveal a little bit about ourselves, and then what that does is it prompts others to reveal a little bit about themselves. And then you create this gradual and reciprocal process that builds intimacy. So not a sexual intimacy, but like a closeness, getting to know each other. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is simply just to be kind. A lot of folks will think that what people are looking for in a friendship or a connection is competence, is like confidence or like power or like being able to do things really well. But really, that's not true. What we're all looking for is just for someone who is kind and warm and trustworthy and loyal. And that's all we need. So we don't have to put on any kind of performance or prove anything or project any kind of particular image. All we have to be is kind. And that I think can take off a lot of the pressure to be competent and confident. And instead, as long as we're just nice, that's sufficient.
I'm a member of Toastmasters, which is a really long-standing club to help people improve their public speaking. The first hour of each meeting is table topics, where somebody asks a question and we have to give a couple-minute impromptu speech. This can be really unnerving for a lot of people, and just being put on the spot makes them clam up. A tip that one of the members gave me was to have a kind of mental Rolodex of a few stories that you could incorporate into table topics. This seems like it could be helpful even in social situations where you can have a few personal stories mentally queued up so that you have a go-to instead of clamming up in one-to-one conversations.
Absolutely. That's totally fine. I think it's totally fine to have a few like kind of canned stories or kind of like prepackaged experiences to share. And that's excellent. And then once you're comfortable with those, the next step is to listen really closely to whatever, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to drill into them, like a WWE wrestler, like, eyeball to eyeball, but just to listen with more than half your attention to whatever they have to say. And I find that, again, because that's turning your attention outward and listening. And then what happens is if your attention is focused outward, you'll often have a question or will come up with something that naturally pivots off that or naturally riffs off that. And so like if you tell your stock story and then maybe somebody tells you something back, and then that sparks another idea in your head, and suddenly you're off to the races and you can talk back and forth. So a canned story is a totally fine place to start. And then once you're comfortable, to start to listen and attend to who you're with and let natural curiosity and interest fill in the gaps. And that will take you the rest of the way.
Do you have any final tips that we haven't touched on that you think would be important for people with social anxiety to know?
Well, I think a really important thing to know is that you're not alone. That so many people feel this, even if it feels like nobody talks about it. So 40% of people consider themselves shy, which is just the everyday, or shy is just the everyday way of saying socially anxious. But if you ask people, have you ever been shy? Like, were you shy as a child? Were you shy as a teenager? The number goes up to 80%. And so almost everybody can relate to this feeling of feeling like not enough or feeling self-conscious or feeling like they're going to be judged. So it's definitely not just you. It's so many other people. And something that I really want to emphasize is that social anxiety often comes bundled with some really positive traits. Folks with social anxiety are often really good listeners. They care about other people. They're quite thoughtful. They're quite empathetic. They're oddly, they're really good at remembering faces. They're good at remembering the people that they meet, and being remembered makes people feel touched and feel liked. And so there are these really great strengths of friendliness and conscientiousness and having high standards that won't go away even as folks work on their social anxiety and start to rise above that and discover how cool they are. So those good traits are part of a package deal. And so I want people to remember that.
Well, congratulations on your book, which, first of all, I love the cover. And second of all, on the fact that it's #1 on Amazon in its category. So
thank you. Yeah.
For people who are resonating with you, tell us where to find you online and a little bit about your book.
Sure. So the book is called How to Be Yourself, Quiet Your Inner Critic and Rise Above Social Anxiety. And it is chock full of concrete tips of things you can do, kind of like what we've talked about here today. But it's also really narrative. It's wrapped in my own story and the stories of people that I've had the privilege to work with, and how they've risen above social anxiety and really grown into themselves. And so I'm proud of it. It's a dream come true to have written it, and I hope it is helpful. That's my ultimate goal, is to be helpful and to take these ideas that previously I could only help one person at a time, and to spread that to a much bigger group of people who can benefit. So that's the goal. And I can be found online. I have a podcast called Savvy Psychologist, which comes out every Friday. And my home on the web is ellenhendriksen.com. And you can join the email list, and I send out tips and resources about social anxiety, every few weeks.
Well, thank you so much for everything you've shared. I have one final question. My husband and I are both talking about someday soon writing our own books. Do you have any tips that you learned along that journey?
Oh my goodness. Yes. So this was my first book, my first experience doing this. And again, it was a dream come true. And I guess the biggest thing I would share is that there are ups and downs. It is a wild ride. Like it's a roller coaster. And so there are days where, for no particular reason, you feel just like, why am I doing this? And you question like everything that you thought was a good idea. And it just feels so hopeless. And then the next day or several days later, again, for no apparent reason, you just feel on top of the world. And you're like, yes, I can do this. This is awesome. I love this. I'm meant to do this. And just to go with that flow, to realize that those ups and downs, not to try to be non-attached to those ups and downs, and realize it is just part of the process, and to surf the wave rather than like kind of letting it yank you around. So that's my biggest take home from writing the book.
I hope you all found this helpful. And if you are suffering from social anxiety, first of all, like Dr. Ellen said, you are not alone. And second of all, realize that everyone else has their own thing that they are suffering with just as much, that makes one particular thing just as hard. And what's great is that all of these tips can be applied to more than just social anxiety. But like Dr. Seuss says, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. And the best way to begin gaining more self-confidence is to do what you're afraid to do. Face your fears. Baby steps. Start building that momentum. You can find all of the links mentioned in this episode, including Ellen's website and book, at mindlove.com/023. And don't forget to sign up for the Morning Mind Love, where you get short daily reminders of how magical and powerful you really are to start each day with a positive mindset. Just visit mindlove.com and sign up right there on the homepage, or text MORNING to 444-999. That's MORNING to 444-999. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.